thank you so much for being with us. Again, my name is Ryan Owens. I am the director of the Tommy Thompson Center on Public Leadership here at UW-Madison. The center is about 4 or 5 years old now, and it's dedicated to the legacy of Governor Tommy Thompson. I would say probably the best governor this state ever had. I suppose I am biased, but Tommy's legacy was an outstanding one. It was a legacy of working together to solve Wisconsin's biggest challenges. Tommy would set an agenda, reach across the aisle, work with people to accomplish his goals, and he did so in a very collegial and leadership-driven capacity. We honor that legacy here by doing a number of things, not the least of which is by hosting discussions, conferences, and events on some of the most topical issues of the day. And this is indeed a topical issue, freedom today and what it means. We're pleased to have Shelby Steele with us tonight to discuss some of his ideas on freedom and where we are tonight as a country. Dr. Steele is a very prolific scholar. We're incredibly grateful to have him with us this evening. So the way this will proceed here is Chancellor Michael Alexander from UW-Green Bay will speak momentarily about his campus and some of the wonderful things they're doing there. He will pass it over very briefly to Dean Simon Brenner, who will talk a little bit about the excellent things going on at UW-Milwaukee. And at that point, they will hand it over to our moderator of the evening, Mr. Gerard Randall. Gerard is a wonderful human being. He is the executive director of the Milwaukee Education Partnership. He was also a regent in the UW System Board of Regents, and he is on the public leadership board here for the Tommy Thompson Center. So I have the pleasure of interacting with him regularly. I was very happy to have him be with us tonight and to moderate this discussion. So I am going to back away now, and I am going to let Chancellor Michael Alexander talk about his outstanding system campus. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ryan. It's good to be with everybody tonight. I'm proud to serve the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay and the faculty, staff, and students that work at the university. We're really proud of things that are going on at UW-Green Bay right now. The campus is growing, has grown for 6 straight years, and is really working to meet the needs of the Northeast Wisconsin region. As a symbol of this, we are really proud to announce that as of today, on our campuses, we have given out over 94,000 shots vaccination shots for the COVID-19 pandemic. We're really proud of that, and through our partnership with Prevea Health, we've been able to make that happen. And that's how we view the role of a regional public university, is, as Ryan was mentioning, to help solve local problems, to serve our community and make our community a better place. We are very proud of our access mission as an institution and how we can help build an equitable Green Bay together and the surrounding 16 counties that we serve as part of our mission. We're very proud tonight to also once again be working with the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership. We're really happy to have worked already several times with the Tommy Thompson Center to be able to give outstanding public speakers a forum to present. And we believe it's part of our mission also to contribute to the public discourse. And so we're very proud to be doing that. I'm very happy that tonight we have to share the hosting duties tonight with UW-Milwaukee. And so it's UW-Green Bay, UW-Milwaukee share a great relationship together. And I know do many common things, including their work on the Freshwater Collaborative that we're working very closely together on to study freshwater in the state of Wisconsin. So with that, I will turn it over to Dean Simon Bonner, who's the Dean of General Studies at UW-Milwaukee, and look forward to his remarks.
Thank you, Chancellor. It's my distinct honor to be a co-sponsor and welcome you to this special and timely webinar by renowned writer and filmmaker, Dr. Shelby Steele, reflecting on freedom in America. My name is Simon Bronner, and I'm the Dean of the College of General Studies of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, which comprises robust campuses in Waukesha and Washington County. Additional co-sponsors from the college are the Washington County Student Government and Association and Waukesha Student Advocates Association. And we're very happy that students are involved with this presentation. This presentation is in line with the college's outreach mission of engagement with our communities on issues of public concern and providing opportunities both inside and outside the classroom for learning experiences that help understand and build a civil democratic society. We've been happy to work with the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership to bring this webinar to you. And I'm personally looking forward to the presentation because of my own teaching and research background in American Studies, which I can say carries over into the college's very much interdisciplinary curriculum. Tonight's presentation has attracted great interest and sometimes criticism, and I want to affirm that the college is committed to providing different learned perspectives on society as part of the college serving as an open forum for ideas. The college does not identify with a particular location on the political spectrum. It encourages dialogue and I hope understanding. Thank you very much for attending, and I hand it back to Gerard Randall.
Thank you, Dean Brunner, Chancellor Alexander, Professor Owens, and to all of you that are joining us this evening. Dr. Shelby Steele is currently a conservative author, columnist, documentary filmmaker, and a Robert J. and Marion E. Oster Senior Fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He specializes in the study of race relations, multiculturalism, and affirmative action. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science, a Master of Arts in Sociology, and a PhD in English. For many years, he was a professor of English at San Jose State University. Steele received the 1990 National Book Critics Circle Award, that's saying a lot, general notification, general nonfiction for his book, The Content of Our Character, A New Vision of Race in America. He has also received an Emmy Award for television documentary writing, 7 Days in Bensonhurst in 1991, National Magazine Award, 1989, Best American Essays, 1989 and 1993. Best American Essays Honorable Mention in 1991, President's Scholar Award from San Jose State University in 1991, and an honorary doctorate from Tiffin University. Dr. Steele's work has appeared in Harper's Magazine, The American Scholar, The New Republic, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, Newsweek, Time, The Washington Post, Dissent, Commentary, The Wilson Quarterly, and many other publications. Media appearances include Nightline, 60 Minutes, Good Morning America, CBS This Morning, CBS, NBC, ABC Nightly News, McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, CNN, C-SPAN, The Charlie Rose Show, Black Entertainment Television, and several national and local radio programs. Dr. Steele, what an impressive body of work. Thank you for joining us this evening to share your thoughts and insights on the historical and current state of race relations in America. I'm certain that our audience looks forward to engaging you in conversation through their questions. And let me begin by asking some of the questions that we hope you will entertain. The first is, what shaped your perspectives on race relations?
Well, I was born into a civil rights family. My mother and father met in Chicago in the early 40s. They were founding members of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. I grew up, we were called CORE babies. And there was a community of people and demonstrations almost every other weekend. And so civil rights was just sort of always there, always discussed, always talked about. I had an opportunity to meet many people now famous, James Farmer and Bayard Rustin and some others, and they were all just astounding, charismatic, articulate people, and I admired them enormously, still do. And they sort of got me started that race is something that needs to be, like it or not, thought about and considered from all sorts of angles. And that my feeling was that we hadn't really done a great job of that in America, and we needed to. Another person who was enormously important in my thinking and so forth, and writing generally, was the writer Ralph Ellison, who was the author of Invisible Man, which I argue is the greatest American novel ever written. The level of complexity, so forth, gave me a view of American life, part of which, of course, was the Black American experience. But this remains the writer who I think is best given us the fullest picture of our racial history and experience and what it's meant on a spiritual and psychological level. And so when I'm in doubt, which is every other day, I pick up my Ralph Ellison, an essay, something that he's written, and I get settled and can think again for myself. So he's the main one.
Given all of the upheaval that's occurred in the previous summer, what do you think is the current state of race relations in the United States?
We have 3 hours, right?
We have 3.
There are many factors. One of them is the fact that America has not really recognized it or fully absorbed it, but I grew up in segregation and rank discrimination. And it is difficult for me to describe how amazing the moral growth of a country can be between the 50s and the 60s when I was a kid and today. The difference is absolutely striking. Racism was everywhere when I was growing up. It controlled every aspect of my life. Today, we're faced with another gift on the one hand, but also another problem, and that's freedom. Freedom is the one thing that our culture didn't really have a chance to adapt to and learn to live comfortably with, and I think we still face that challenge today. Well, I'll leave it there. Freedom is a very rigorous taskmaster. It asks for certain values and so forth. If you look at Black America, we've been really good at protest. There's probably no people in the world better at protesting than us. But we're now faced with freedom. And freedom requires something different than protest. If you're going to thrive in it, if you're going to do well in it, the amount of the focus on individual responsibility is overwhelming in freedom. It's frightening, actually. And yet, I think where race relations are today, at least from the African-American point of view, is that we now are dealing with the shock, what I call the shock of freedom. It doesn't come as a seductive, sort of character. It just knocks you out. All of a sudden, there you are, and you're in that position where you don't have the alibis, the excuses that weren't alibis and excuses in the past because we were really discriminated against. But when you bring them out today, that they sound that way. They sound as though we're not really accepting the challenge. We're intimidated by it. And I think that you look at the violence today and so forth, the protests today, it's almost as though and this is one of the features, I think, of freedom. And you see this in oppressed groups around the world when they suddenly come out of long periods of oppression and they're free. They invariably want to retreat a part of them wants to retreat back into non-freedom, into that place they were at before, because it's safe, and they know what to do and they know how to live there. But living in freedom is a much different, very demanding situation to be in. And it's intimidating. And I think we as Black Americans are dealing with that intimidation now. And so what we're doing is with a part of us is reinventing racism. We now have a language that reinvents it. We call it systemic racism, structural racism, unconscious bias, intersectionality. We got a whole language that says to us, you're not free. Racism is still here. Racism is still the biggest problem you have. Well, we don't mind that because we know that world. And so I think that is at this point our biggest and our most difficult challenge is to accept that we are at this point in time as free as any human beings have ever been anywhere in the world. We can do anything we want. We can become the president of the United States. We can become the greatest jazz musician who's ever played music. We can become all manner of things. If we choose to do that and to work hard for it and organize our lives toward those goals. Well, that puts it, who does well in freedom? What groups do well in freedom? Well, there are many. I don't want to name any, but many do. Many nurture that sense of responsibility that has to be there from the very beginning, and they come to thrive in freedom, regardless of their race, regardless of their ethnicity, their gender, their background, whatever it may be. And I think we now are ready for that challenge, and I think we've got good times ahead. We got to stop protesting every 5 minutes about things, and focus on what's possible, what the options are. It saddens me to see us literally run after racism. Well, we're on the plane to Minneapolis right now as we speak, and we're going to protest this tonight, and we're going to make a stand, and we're going to make a stand for what? We've already got freedom. Is it perfect? Obviously not. It never will be perfect. But we are confronted now with enormous opportunity, and protest has become, we're so free that protest has become obsolete. It's an obsolescence, it's old fashioned. It's 1964 when we're here in 2021. And the people who are protesting, I would love to sit them down and talk and say, what kind of grade point average do you have in college now? What are your career goals? How are you outlining your future? How are you preparing for it? What responsibility are you taking for your advancement? Because if you take responsibility for your advancement, you will be able to do anything you want.
As I'd indicated, your work has been widely recognized and honored. Your thoughts have been taught on many of our campuses across the country. In your role, at the Robert J. and Marion Oster Hoover Institution at Stanford, how do you transmit those views that you just articulated through your role as a senior fellow there?
Hoover's been very good with me. They have supported me in the work that I do. There are people there from extremely talented people from around the world. I have benefited enormously from interacting with. I used to sit down every other day or so and have a cup of coffee with Milton Friedman. Thomas Sowell is a very good friend of mine. We talk a good bit about the world and its many manifestations. And there are several other people there who make it a very rich environment. They expect a lot from you, but it's, you know, I can't imagine being at a better place.
Thank you. What do you think is the role of government in reducing poverty levels and promoting equality?
I think the government, over the last 60 years, sounds like an overly dramatic statement, but so be it, has become in effect the new oppressor of Black America. The liberalism that they have practiced, public housing, taking over the public education, enlarged welfare payments, the war on poverty, and so forth, have been programs that essentially look at Black people and say, you know what? You people really are inferior. You can't redeem yourselves and overcome the mark of oppression by yourselves. And so therefore we, the government, will redeem ourselves from the shames of racism by doing that for you, by lifting you up, by giving you this and that and resources and so forth. We will be the agents of your fate, of your life. And we will be generous because we are in fact a wealthy nation and we can give you many, many things. That point of view, which came out of the 60s, has done more damage to the Black American community than any oppression. In slavery, they don't take over your soul, but this sort of reform goes inside and takes over your humanity and tells you that you need help. You can't make it alone, and that we're going to give it to you. And then, of course, in our own day and time, the payoff is that then we're asked to vote in a certain way in order to sort of keep this sort of dependency going. And so we get to think, we come around to thinking that dependency is our freedom. Dependency is our future. Dependency is what we're owed. And if we protect that dependency, we'll get over. We'll succeed. This breaks my heart because dependency is dependency. And so what, by most socioeconomic measures, after 50, 60 years of this, Blacks are farther behind whites than they were in the 50s and the early 60s by almost every socioeconomic measure. That's what liberalism has done to Black America. You couldn't have a worse enemy. I always refer back to another one of my heroes, Frederick Douglass. They asked Frederick Douglass after the Civil War, what should we do with all these Black people that we've just freed from slavery? Frederick Douglass's answer was, leave us alone. Have faith in us. We can do it. Why should we can go through life generation after generation whining about what others give us rather than going out and making it for ourselves? There is no other way. We'll find that out. Black Lives Matter will find that out. They're going nowhere. They're helping no one.
Well, you raise an interesting point regarding government programs, but there are certainly a myriad of social welfare programs that have been constructed outside of government, some with the support of government. And many of those social welfare programs have now taken on support from the corporate community in their efforts to promote the work of their organizations. What do you think of those organizations that are not independent of government, but certainly marching to the same tune as many of those that would promote more government social welfare.
Well, I think most of those organizations, I presume we're talking about the same ones. But you know, again, most of those organizations are and they are funded lavishly in many cases by corporate America, who's happy to have an opportunity to send money to Black people. It helps their brand and so forth. They're part of the problem. Let me ask you one question. When all these people, the government, the corporations, and so forth, give things, resources, programs, so forth, to Black Americans, how many of them ever ask anything from Black Americans?
Well, I'm assuming that that's a rhetorical question.
That's a rhetorical question, I guess. But how do they, when do they ask what they're saying? We don't have any faith in you that if we ask something, we know you're going to fail. And so here we are like children caught in a dependency. Once again, we're not in charge of our own fate. We're not the agents of our own lives. And so then we sit here, excuse me, and we fret over what organizations are going to give the most money this year, and when so and so is going to do this. We form a politics around dependency, where we're evaluating the outside society all the time for what it's giving us, for what we lack. We never get punished for what for our weaknesses. We just sort of blame them on those around. Well, this is all part, I believe, of a social psychology that comes from 4 centuries of oppression, where we were completely denied anything like a full self-responsible humanity, where we were treated like animals or less. They had more respect for animals in many cases than for us. That's our fight now, I think. Others will disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine. But to me, our fight is one based for simple things like dignity. I want to see that. But when I was growing up in the 50s and the 60s, before we had any government programs, the Black community I grew up in, the South Side of Chicago, the husbands, the fathers were in the home. Almost everybody I knew had a father. They were prideful. They saw public housing as something a little shameful, that you never wanted to get so bad off that you had to rely on public housing or welfare. There was a stigma attached. There was high expectations for young people in schools. Do you know that in the 1950s, Black kids went to college with slightly lower grade point averages than whites? They graduated 4 years later with slightly higher grade point averages than whites. Since the 60s, you can go to any university you want, you'll find Black students at the bottom. Well, my message to them is don't spend time in Minneapolis, spend time in the library. Spend time, let's develop ourselves as individuals. That's where that's our gift to our people. Again, Ralph Ellison, my hero, said it beautifully. The group is the gift of its individuals. You help the group by making something of yourself. If you're just out here demonstrating and protesting when those things have become obsolete, you're not helping, you're wasting time.
You seem to echo in your remarks someone that I'm certain you know, former California Regent Ward Connerly. And he spoke around the country during his time of service on the Board of Regents in California about multiculturalism and the impact that multiculturalism it was going to have on policy in this country and overall on race relations in this country. What do you think was maybe predictive of his comments during his time 20 years ago?
Well, I'm not sure how to tell me a little more.
He firmly believed that California, in its slide towards becoming more and more supportive of multiculturalism, as he saw it, was going to hit a wall, so to speak, and that there would be lots of difficulty in their trying to bring this country together as a blended kind of country, as opposed to separate groups that wanted to remain separate in their expressions of culture.
So he was seeing separatism as a threat.
Correct.
Uh-huh. Well, I agree with him. If I'm understanding it correctly, I would certainly agree with that, because I do think that the great potential, I've lived in California too for a long time, but the great potential was we do have so many different groups, bring so much to the table. But separatism, I tend to be vehemently against. I've never seen it work anywhere. It's a retreat from the world and from the challenges of the world. And when people take on separatist philosophies and points of view, it's usually more out of fear than anything else. Again, freedom is a little scary. It means you're up against everybody. Separatism, it seems to me, to be a way to avoid it in some ways.
I think he saw multiculturalism as more factionalism as opposed to integration.
Yes.
And that threat certainly seemed, in his view, to be evidenced in the direction that California as a state through its policies was going, particularly in education.
Yes. Well, he was right.
I'd like to turn to something that I think is on the minds of many, and that's the situation that has prompted a lot of the protests around the country in Minnesota. And not just the incident with George Floyd a year ago, but currently the young man that was killed by police officers just a few days ago, and the protests that are being prompted. You'd spoken a little bit about protesting, and particularly protests that are occurring in the context of today's age. Do you have any additional thoughts to share on that, particularly as it relates to those protests that are currently occurring around the perceptions of police overreach?
Well, I made a film on the Michael Brown case 5 or 6 years ago, where a young man was shot and killed in Ferguson, Missouri, and by a police officer and so forth. One of the things that, from studying that kind of situation, looking at it, and there are many now across the country, Trayvon Martin, Freddie Gray, Eric Garland, several others, where you have an isolated situation, white policeman, black, usually young male, killed, shot and killed. Well, what invariably happened, what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, when in our film, is that there was an explosion of interest. And there is an explosion of interest now in Minneapolis. Everybody is running to Minneapolis and with a camera and a microphone. And I think the fundamental reason is that we sense, all of us do, that in an event like that, there's an inevitable power struggle. There's a lot of power in the idea of Black suffering, Black victimization, because it raises the question of, is racism still alive? Are these people still suffering from unfair policemen, from white bigotry of one kind or another? And we want the answer. We want to know, yes, they are still suffering. We are still a racist nation, or no, they're not. They're not. This is an isolated incident that carries no meaning beyond that. Well, I tend to take usually the latter point of view, unless facts. But again, one of the things that's interesting is facts don't mean anything in these cases. Michael Brown is still seen in America as a victim of white racism. In many quarters, when the actual facts for different investigations, government investigations, show that Michael Brown pretty much engineered his own fall, his own demise, that the policeman shot in self-defense. No proof of systemic racism. Well, you know, we're now going to go to Minneapolis and we're going to see, is it there? And look at what's interesting to me is look at the lust people have for whether or not this was a racial incident. We must know. I won't be able to know myself unless we uncover the truth here and find out whether this is and this is what these events have come to. Because again, we're all on, whites and Blacks, we're all on that sort of post-oppression period where we're free and we don't know what to make of it. We don't know whether Minneapolis really does prove racism or whether it doesn't prove racism. And so how many Black youth were shot and killed this year even so far across the country, probably thousands. By other Black youth. And yet nobody goes. Nobody cares. Nobody says anything really significant about it. Nobody says we should devote resources and go into the inner city, my God, and find out what is causing this human collapse into a kind of nihilism where people are killing themselves. Suppose white people were killing us in those numbers. My God, it's unthinkable. Well, again, we're much more interested in blame. Who's guilty, whites or Blacks? Because that's where power is. Whites want this not to be an incident of racism, because that gives them moral authority and power. Blacks want it to be racism. That's because that's our moral authority and power. And so we're waging this kind of cultural civil war around these kinds of events. I suppose we have to go through a period of this. I have no way of knowing, but they're now so predictable, and they're always almost the same.
One of the questions from the audience was, what do you say to those who accuse you of victim blaming?
Oh, I love that. Victimization is power for Black people. Our biggest power in American life is not that we invented the computer or that we did something else. It is that we are the victims of America's worst, by far worst sin, its original sin of racism. And if we are victims, then power is due us. America owes us, and we have entitlement. So the problem with victimization is that in order to win entitlement, you have to be a victim. But if you're a victim, you're virtually impotent. You're not in charge of your own fate. You're a victim. And so in order to get, again, this little trinket from the government or the larger society, we sell ourselves out in victimhood. and say that, you know, blaming the victim as though blacks are always the victim. They're always the ones who we have to bail out and save in some way. They can never do it by themselves. And so we go right back into the same vision of blacks as inferior that fueled slavery and segregation. We don't make any progress out of that sort of ghetto. We're locked in there. Well, let's stop thinking of ourselves as victims. Let's give up that excuse. And if you fail at something, you fail at something. We all do. You pick yourself up and you move on. You don't claim victimhood, because the minute you claim victimhood, you're impotent. You have no way to affect your life, to make it better. You cut yourself off from your own opportunities. You become what the oppressor said you were from at the beginning.
Dr. Steele, there are several questions from the audience here that I hope we have time for you to respond to. The first is from a former regent of a university system. He asked, Professor Steele, I'm a former regent of a university system, and I'm concerned about the lack of intellectual diversity on campus and how the enforcement of racial orthodoxy by administrators and faculty circumscribe the development of students' critical thinking skills. How can the tax and tuition payers who fund the instructional budgets of our public universities begin to change that ideological orthodoxy?
Well, I certainly agree with the thinking behind that question. And I think that one of the things that I've written a lot about is white guilt. And white guilt is not a feeling of guilt. It is a terror of being seen as a racist, a terror, just scared to death. Whites are scared to death that if they do this or make that, say that, use that word as opposed to this word, they're going to be seen as a racist and diminished accordingly. And there's no fate worse today than being seen as a racist. And so whites, that pressure, that fear, that terror causes people to act guiltily when they don't even feel any guilt, when they have no reason to feel guilt. They still act guiltily simply because they're white. And whites once oppressed blacks. And so when you talk about universities and freedom of speech and that sort of thing, whites don't feel they've taken a hit and lost moral authority by acknowledging their past, which I think was an act of unbelievable bravery. But they paid a price. They lost moral authority. And so the answer to this gentleman's question is in many ways obvious. You stand up to these institutions that are now using this critical race theory and all this sort of thing to squelch dialogue and freeze and cut off free speech. They need to be, people need to stand up to the institutions and demand that they not do that, and to withhold funding and fight in every way for freedom of speech. In other words, we'll have to make a fight against the left, which is where most of these things come from at this point in time. But there is, because of white guilt, there's no easy way. You will pay a price for standing up for freedom of speech in an American university today. You will be hurt if you become very vociferous. If you become identified with that position, your career will be injured, and everybody knows that. In most industries today, Hollywood is another example of people being stigmatized for any view that might somehow remotely be considered conservative. And this is really hurting our culture. It's hurting our way of life. And we've got to do the courageous thing, I think, in the long run, and stand up to these forces, and take a stand. But I am honored to be invited here today. It indicates to me that I've come to an institution that I don't know if they agree with me or not, but they're open-minded, and they're interested in hearing a different point of view. And thank God for that. That right there is what we all have to do to keep our country strong.
You had mentioned earlier your role in the development of a film. Is that the film that you developed with your son? And if so, what was that experience like? And particularly, as you had mentioned, the role of Hollywood in either censoring or promoting its views, or views that perhaps it doesn't want to promote.
Well, we've had quite an adventure with our last film, What Killed Michael Brown, an examination of that whole event and all the fallout from it, and then what that represented in the larger society and so forth. And our film, we went to have our film streamed on Amazon, and they canceled and sent it back with a nasty letter saying, don't change the title, don't do anything, don't ever send this in to us again, and thank you, goodbye. Well, the Wall Street Journal got wind of this and wrote a couple opinion pieces on it, naming Amazon as canceling me and this film that we had made. And within a few days, we got a little call from Amazon saying they had made a mistake and that they were going to go ahead and stream our film anyway. I give them credit for this. They took the opportunity to turn it around, and they have streamed it ever since. It is available now. What Killed Michael Brown, and we're very proud of it. We worked hard, 2.5 years to put it together. And I think if you see it and you look at that film and you consider that it was canceled, that really says it all. It's a serious, I think, well-made film. And to think that something like that a huge corporation like Amazon can just strike down something in that way is truly frightening.
Along those lines, the influence of Hollywood. What do you think of the 1619 Project?
Oh, I don't know where to begin. It's it is a long, excruciating journey into the victimization of Black people. It's dishonest in many places. It is meant to be nothing more than propaganda for a Black point of view, that arguing again our helplessness, our victimization. It plays the violin over our fate. You weak, pitiful people, look what happened to you, and how much you were abused, and how these supposedly great men, founding fathers and so forth, betrayed, even they abused you, and so forth. And so it is. I want to look at people like that, and I want to say, are you proud of your race in any way? You're showing us to be nothing but victims because you are trying to shake down white America. You're trying to expand Black entitlement. You're trying to get paid for your past suffering. In other words, you're hustling the suffering of your own people. You're not helping us stand up and deal with freedom and all the challenges we have, you're just keeping alive the myth that we'll never be free and that we're helpless, and that's the end of it. What a sad, heartbreaking venture to be indulged, to be engaged in. You know, you'll get me. White liberals love this. The white left loves these kind of projects like this because they love the idea of Black weakness and suffering and victimhood. They need it. Without Blacks as victims, then the world falls apart for them. Their whole self-esteem, liberals, is that they are morally superior and they will lift up Blacks from the agony that they've lived in. And so when you say, well, you know, Blacks can lift themselves up, you take away their opportunity, chance for greatness. You take away their chance for innocence. And so they're upset. Well, young militant Blacks, too many, make a living by selling to Black victimization to white liberals. It's a demeaning, symbiotic relationship that keeps both groups behind. Luckily, I think most Americans, Black and white, are not that dumb and don't fall for it and know better. I count on that. That is my hope.
In fact, that was one of the questions from the audience where they're asking, what are the best ways for the average white citizen to be more involved in appropriate responses to the challenges that we face?
Ask something of the people you help. Period. If you want to do good works. I worked for 3 years in East St. Louis in government programs. I have a good experience in how they work. Ask something of someone. If you're going to give some Black high school students a preference into a university of some kind, make it contingent on a B+ grade average. Make it contingent on performance, on a self-uplift, self-transformation. You'll never be transformed if you don't take responsibility for it yourself. This you learn as you live life. Nobody else can develop you. Nobody else can make you into something. Look within yourself. Maybe you don't see much, but believe me, there's a lot there. And you have to learn to trust it and have some faith in it. Take a chance. But do not fashion yourself as a victim who then sells them, makes whites feel better because whites are going to take care of you. What can whites do? Whites can just say, I'd like to see you do better, and I'm even willing to help you, but this is what I ask. And I hold you to it.
There was, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
One of the heroes that you mentioned was Frederick Douglass, and a contemporary of his was Booker T. Washington. And one of the questions from the audience is Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois had different approaches to how African Americans should come out of the slavery experience. Which of those gentlemen, W.E.B. Du Bois or Booker T. Washington, hold thoughts similar to what you hold?
I see parts of what I believe in both men. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to equivocate, but I love Booker T. Washington's cast down your bucket where you are. I think ought to be the mantra of, continue to be the mantra of Black America, is the way of the future and so forth. On the other hand, I like the intellectual, open-minded exploration of W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a little bit more of a protest writer, and you know, as he himself said, he had cultural advantages that Booker T did not have. But he had absolute respect for Booker T. Washington. And he was himself Harvard educated and so forth. So he had many advantages. And I admire his work. He asked a lot of people. He probably asked more of white people than Washington did, because he was probably closer to them. But I agree with what both men asked for and what they focused on. They were both self-helpers. I would throw into that little camp Malcolm X, who's a hero of mine, because Malcolm X knew this simple truth that's sometimes hard to accept, but Malcolm understood that you have to be the engine of development. We have to be our own engine of development. The longer we look away, we look for reparations, we look for this, we look for dependency, we'll stay essentially slaves. We'll be at the bottom. We have to make that individual personal transformation, and where we take responsibility. And if we don't succeed, that's not the end of the world. You get right back up. People of all races. The bottom line is, we're just another human story. There's nothing special about us. All human beings who've been through what we've been through are the same. People who finally discover the importance of self-help start to do pretty well. They start to do very well, in fact. People who don't learn that lesson, who don't integrate it, never thrive.
Another question from the audience is, should colorblindness, and they have colorblindness in quotes, be the end result of multiculturalism?
Well, I think that, you know, I believe the following. Anytime anybody picks up race, uses it in some argument, in whatever way, they're seeking power. They're after power. Race has no inherent meaning in itself. What does the color of one's skin mean, you know, metaphysically? Absolutely nothing. It carries no meaning. We use it precisely because it's empty. It has no meaning. And so we can apply whatever meaning we want to it. And we can use it for all sorts of ill-gotten desires. And that's what we human beings do. We use race. I use it. If I could go right now, if they didn't know who it was, to a university and say, well, I'm Black. You have to hire me. And I'd get hired in seconds until they found out who I was. But the point is, that's what they put us in the position. That's what all these programs put us in the position of doing, trading on our race, using it for power. It has no other significance. So somebody who wants to be racially blind, that's wonderful. That means that they will relate to me as a human being, and they'll get me, and we'll have a much better chance of getting along.
Another question from the audience. This one I pull. It says, speaking to the freedom you say is available to minorities in this era, Black men are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated at some time in their lives than white men. Is this an example of structural racism?
This is an example of the fact that Blacks also commit more crimes than white people. They do. No one objects, no one denies that. It's common knowledge. So you're looking at half the problem. You're looking at the problem that sees Blacks as victims. I don't see them as victims. I see them as human beings. And they probably did something, I don't know what, but they probably did something to end up in prison. And and we have to be responsible for that, as all of us are. Let's look at it. Let's just stop seeing Blacks. And once you have the phrase Black men, right away you have this sort of image of inferiority and weakness, and they have to be taken care of. And so I have to support programs that let them out of jail and early and so forth. Well, there are, in fact, and I know of certain programs that deal with the people coming out of prison, Black men particularly coming out of prison, and helping them adjust to freedom. And I support those programs 1,000%. I think they're a blessing. I think they compensate, sadly, for the lack of fathers in the Black community today. That's where so many problems come from, is that young boys particularly don't have fathers who straighten them out, keep them on the straight and narrow. And so they end up without a father. The prison becomes a father. Some authority is eventually going to assert itself. And very often it's prison. But that's our fault too. We goes back to the problems of the Black family, and which I think 98% of our problems today stem from that, from the difficulties that the Black family has.
You remember in his later years, Bill Cosby would travel the country and echo that same message that you just delivered about the Black family. And he was widely castigated for having done so. Yeah. And that certainly gave rise to many coming back with I told you so messages after he had faced his most difficult trials in his later years in life, his personal travails. One of the people who is part of the audience had written, how do we come out of this current state? Are you optimistic?
That's a very good question. I can't claim to be optimistic in the short run. We have spent so much time, since the 60s. I was a part of all that madness, Black Power and so forth in the 60s. We spent so much time building this idea that our race, which caused us to be oppressed, is now going to lift us out of oppression. Our race is not going to do that. We have to do that as individuals. And then, of course, if you do it and I do it and somebody else does it, then you look up one day and the race has moved up. But the race is, again, as Ellison says, the gift of its individuals. That is the only way. Well, I am encouraged. There is in Black America today, at least the beginnings of what we call in the popular culture, Black conservatives. Well, I don't know whether they're actually conservatives or not. That's a very specific thing. But I do know that they are at odds with the idea that Blacks are eternal victims. And they want a new life. They want to take charge of their own lives. They want to be self-sufficient. They want to move up in the broader world, not just be in a ghetto. And I see more and more of that in America. The vote for Donald Trump in the Black community was twice what it was the first time around, even though he lost. Well, that's a huge indicator of change. And I hope that change continues. We can only benefit from it in the long run.
Another question.
I think I've lost the sound. I've lost the sound here, so.
That was my fault.
Oh.
Do you think the Black community is being pushed towards socialism?
I think so. Yeah, it is. See, everybody uses the Black community. Well, if the Black community thinks for itself, they can't use us anymore. And so they now talk about socialism because socialism is a philosophy, a point of view that de-individualizes people. You're a Black. You are a teamster. You're a union person. You are some manifestation of a collective, of a group. And so that's what I think liberalism very invariably does. And it cuts us off from the greatest source of strength that we have, which is ourselves. And that's what makes me very sad about that point of view.
Another question from the audience is, when do you think it's appropriate for government to help those who are struggling?
Well, when number one, they really, really need help. And there are times when we all really, really do need help. There are natural disasters. There are situations now with education. I'd like to see the governments stand more for traditional values in education than they have for a long time. So I think that's one way. I think that's one way.
Another question, and this goes back to the optimism question. Says, Dr. Steele, you retain a sense of optimism, and is it perhaps because I'm younger, but I do not? The reason for my pessimism is centered on the adoption of ideas like CRT and such terminology across universities, churches, and many other mediating institutions. Mediating institutions are a part of what has made America great. So what do you think will turn institutions and to recognize the destructive nature of CRTs?
Well, I certainly recognize the destructive nature of CRTs. We're on the same page there. In the short run, they're doing a lot of damage, even as we speak. And I am, in fact, genuinely afraid for the future because they've just swept the country, and now you see it at work at the corporate level, and we're all suddenly just Black numbers again. We're not individuals, and individualism seems in the debate have a very weak voice. We don't hear much. We don't hear much. We don't allow ourselves to hear much of that point of view. But let me be very clear. I'm older now, so I have some little experience of this. Time changes everything. I've seen us go through some of the stupidest things. I was around in the 60s when Black Power came out, and we had afros bigger than the bushes that the Versailles Palace, and I was a part of all of that. And people were saying, my God, that's the end of them. They're not going to make it. I think people in a even faintly free society, ultimately, the truth catches up with them. They come to accept, just from growing older, that the arc of life is longer than you may think, that we go through phases, that change comes. The only thing that is guaranteed is that change will come. That's guaranteed. I hope that much of it is for the better. I hope that Black America can find we as Black America can find ourselves as individuals within this great country, the greatest country that there ever was. And what a blessing to be able to live your life here. I've spent a lot of time in Africa, and wow, I've had Africans say to me, I wish they had taken my ancestors as slaves so I could be where you are now. They're not confused about the blessing of being an American. And they remind you of that, and all power to them. But I have faith we will someday. We'll move through this silly phase, and we'll look back and shake our heads at this time. See,
another question. Yeah, another question from the audience is, what do you think of the Black Power movement?
I think it doesn't exist. It never did. I was a part of it back in the 60s. Had my afro out to here. My dashiki and so forth, and traveled in Africa and spent time there and got to know writers there and so forth. But there's no such thing as Black power. There's no such thing as white power. Whites have disagreements and so forth, and we Blacks will. But the idea that if we just get together as Blacks, and if we will just join together as Blacks, we can do anything, is a very bad idea. Because you can't, if all I know about you is that you are Black, I don't know anything about you. I don't know whether you're trustworthy. I don't know whether you really are creative and got something to offer the project that we're working on. I don't know any of that just because you're Black. So no, the white guy with blonde hair and blue eyes might be exactly who I'm looking for. I'm going to take him. I'm going to take him. And I'm not going to see his race in a serious way. I'm going to look at the individual. That seems to me to be the point of view that we ought to encourage. That's the point of view that gives us in the long run freedom, the most freedom.
Another question from the audience. I have a friend who is a successful nurse. She is Black. I worked with her when she was a nursing student. She told me her Black community chastised her for being in nursing school and trying to make it. How does one fight against this mentality?
Leave that community. Find another one. Don't stay around negative people, not even for a minute. Don't think that you're going to change them and make them better. That's a devastating, that tells you a million things about this other person and the company they keep and so forth. Again, individual by individual. But yes, when we are afraid, because one thing we're fighting off, I have great empathy for this woman. One thing we're fighting off is this holdover from oppression, that we can't compete, that freedom is too much for us. So we experience freedom as a kind of shame. It reveals my weaknesses. It reveals what I'm unable to do. And I have to face that. And I don't want to. And so I will tell my other racial cohorts, don't try. If you try, you put me at jeopardy, because I'm not trying. And so you get a sort of company of losers. Do we want that? I don't think we want that in the Black community. I think we ought to be encouraging each other to do the best we can to operate at the top of our game as much as we can. Understanding no one's perfect. We all struggle is difficult for everybody, but we should entertain nothing less than that and never be around people who have that kind of a negative attitude.
How do we get that message across to younger people who may not have the option of leaving that community or their community or even their family when they have this sense that they are not being encouraged to have high expectations?
Cast down your buckets where you are. If you don't have an easy way out, probably won't. It doesn't make your situation different. If you look around at your life, you're going to school or whatever, then say, this is my way out. If the school is bad, say, I'm going to do well anyway. I'm going to be something. I'm going to learn. And I'm going to do that. And nothing is going to dissuade me from that. So it's old-fashioned can-doism that we need. We'll make it happen. My own father had a third grade education. That's all. He came from the South, from Kentucky, and had to teach himself to read and to write. He never stopped pushing himself all his life. He bought houses, he rebuilt them, he sold. He wouldn't stop. His idea, I came home from college and told him that I was sick and tired of this, of college life, and all they wanted me to do was write papers and blah, 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 blah. And he just stopped me cold and said, I want you to go back to that school, and I want you to be like a pirate. You steal everything you can. You get in every class you can, and you learn, you steal it. You learn that knowledge. And you never stop. And he said, he used to always say, and don't put yourself up against just the best Black in the class. Put yourself up against the best person in the class. Beat them. You don't even have to say anything to them. Just beat them. And go and live like that. Well, where did he get that from? With some concept of Blackness or rather? No, he got that because it's a universal human truth, a way successful people, particularly Americans, have always confronted life. So that's.
Who do you think are some of the current best thinkers on the topic of race relations in the country today?
I'm a little brokenhearted, I should just say, by some of the younger writers, some of whom are very talented. I won't name names, but they still fall into this victimization trap, this blacker than thou trap. And this is the first generation that is really and truly free. They can really do whatever they want to do. And we need some guidance from them on that kind of experience, facing into freedom, taking charge of one's fate, without regard to race, but as a free human being. And I wish more young writers, more young thinkers would help us out with that. And I think that when that finally happens, some young writer really finds their voice as a free person, it will be a wonderful thing. The early James Baldwin, for example, is not to get into literature and so forth, but the early James Baldwin, some of the greatest, just soaring writing on being a free Black man in Paris, and how different that was, and how he discovered himself. He thought it was Paris, but he realized it was freedom that taught him what he needed to know. Well, I'd love to see more of that from young writers.
Another question, and this is prompted by a statistic that I saw about 3 weeks ago. And I was asked what segment of the population in terms of ethnicity would be the largest segment of the American population by 2050. And I was told that it would be those who are of Asian descent. And so this question, I'm an Asian woman, first generation immigrant daughter to parents, sisters who immigrated to the US in the 70s. I'm married to a really wonderful white man, and we have 3 lovable kids who are half Asian and half white. It pains me, and pains in capital letters, to hear people talking about how bad and horrible white people are. Isn't that in itself the definition of racism? And how can people shout anti-racism and yet be so racist themselves when hurling hate at all white people, especially white men?
Mhm. Well, good question.
And a mouthful.
Yeah, indeed. A lot of details there. But I think she obviously makes perfect sense. She's living her life as an individual American. And I just love that. So there's different races who are going to be involved in that. That's our future. I'm happy to see it come. That's our future. There's nothing going to stop it. I live in California. Over 50% of the children born here are minorities. Whites are in the minority at this point, where people of color are in the majority. That's going to be the national story. It's going to be the international story, I believe. Europe is in the same sort of turmoil that we're in. We're going to discover at some point how absolutely ridiculous the idea of race is, how unsustainable it is. It's never been sustained. It's at some point always dismissed as irrelevant, as empty, as offering nothing. And I think that bodes well for us. We'll get tired of it. People will look back at this time and wonder what we're talking about.
Well, we have time for one more question, and then I would like to offer you the opportunity for some closing remarks. This final question comes from the audience, and it's why was the problem of crack cocaine largely ignored and prosecuted until the problem of OxyContin arose?
Well, there's a racial implication because crack went into the Black community, OxyContin went into the white community. And so here is a belabored effort to once again establish Blacks as victims. Oh my God, even in the drug world, they get put in jail first. They suffer. Whereas whites who are, they're reluctant, it's much slower to go after OxyContin than to go after crack. If you think for 1 minute, you will realize that crack is a death sentence. They didn't go after it fast enough. And I haven't seen them come out and say that, well, you know, we're going to allow whites to do OxyContin. I haven't seen that either. It's a different drug, different experience, and so forth. But those comparisons like that are often just done just to reinforce our idea of race. The race is always there, even in the drug problem, even in OxyContin and crack, we're dealing with race. Well, we're dealing with human beings, and that's a silly way to go. I wish they had gone after both the crack and the OxyContin a lot sooner than they did. I think a lot of people would like that. But well, see, I'm just a citizen. I am a citizen of the United States. And I want to be clear. I am a citizen of the United States before I am a Black man. Before. I'm a Black man, proudly so. Spent my life studying the culture. But I'm a citizen of the United States, number one. And I want to deal with everybody I meet as a citizen of the United States. And I want to insist on that in the culture that I live in. And I will continue to fight for that. in whatever way I can.
Dr. Benjamin Hooks, during a visit to Milwaukee back in the early 2000s, 2003, in fact, gave a speech. And in this speech, he said that America is the greatest country on the face of the earth. He said he never leaves home to travel abroad without two things. One is his passport in good order, the other a round trip ticket, because no matter what the problems of this country are, they are fixable. And I believe I hear in your remarks that you believe that as well. So I'd
absolutely
like to offer you some final thoughts before we close out tonight's conversation.
Well, thank you. I probably said more than enough already. But again, I think, just to sum it up, we're a people who did undergo 4 centuries of the most dehumanizing oppression. I mean, brutally dehumanizing, degrading, that any group has ever endured. And I am proud of our endurance. We're still here. We're talking to each other. We should have been long gone, given what we were put through. But now today, the biggest seduction, the biggest Achilles heel that we have is this idea that our victimization is who we really are. And if you don't testify to the victimization of the racial victimization, then you are betraying your race. That is I think and so the more you complain about your racial fate, the more America likes you, the more white liberals like you, the more other blacks like you. But also the more you lose touch with who you really are. I think our humanity is at stake. Who we are as people, as individuals is at stake. We can't give it up to race. Again, as I say, I'm a citizen. That's as far as I go in terms of a collective identity. And I long for the day when the Black identity is no longer there, is irrelevant, is not meaningful. I long for that day. Whites have gotten to that day in the past. Now they're starting to have an identity again, and that's not so good. But in the past, they got a racial identity that meant nothing. What an achievement! I want that for us, that we get to that place where being Black means nothing, tells you nothing about the person. I long for that.
Well, Dr. Steele, I really thank you for this provocative and enlightening opportunity to discuss with you the current state of race relations in the United States. I certainly look forward to that day to come when, as you would put it, we don't have race to be a relevant concern. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the Thompson Center for presenting this conversation, and our co-host campuses, the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay, the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. I'd like to thank our audience for joining in with us for this last hour and a half, and for offering up some very thoughtful questions for you to respond to. We wish you well, and I look forward to another opportunity when we might come together to have meaningful conversations like this tonight. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you for having me. It means a lot to me to do this kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night to all.